Welcome back to another edition of Parks Fermé, brought to you here on the beach of Zandvoort this Dutch Grand Prix weekend. Myself, Ollie Wilson, as always, joined by Ian Parks, our man in the paddock, for nearly every single Grand Prix event, but this one has been a pretty good weekend so far, particularly if you're a Dutch F1 fan, Ian.
We've been pretty blessed. We've had beautiful sunshine. As you say, we're on the beach, sea backdrop. It's fortunate that this race isn't next weekend because it's going to chuck it down all next weekend. So as I say, great warmth, great hospitality as well from the Dutch people. And Max delivered on Saturday when it mattered most.
He certainly did. Max Verstappen will be starting on pole for the Dutch Grand Prix this Sunday. The roar from the crowd when he crossed the finishing line was only usurped by when the Ferraris went across and everybody realised Max was going to be on pole. This place lives and breathes Max Verstappen. The fans have been fantastic for the majority of it, but there is a moment that has marred this Grand Prix weekend so far, and we do need to talk about it. The two incidents where flares were thrown onto the track, wholly unacceptable in the world of F1 and any sporting event, and it really is a big stain.
Yeah, let's put this into some context. We are talking about a real minority of fans. From what I've seen across this weekend so far, the Dutch fans are just a credit to their country and to Max and to Formula One. But as you say, it shouldn't happen. We are on one of the biggest stages. This is a global sport. These images are getting projected around the world, and we shouldn't see what we saw yesterday during qualifying. Thankfully, the one fan whose flare did actually go off at the start of Q2 and who ruined Alex Albon's initial foray onto the track at that point, he was ejected. The second fan towards Q3, they weren't found. Now, that flare didn't go off. There is some suggestion, believe it or not, that it might have been targeted towards Lewis Hamilton when he was on track. We can't really prove that. It was in the vicinity of when Lewis was on the track. He was actually entering the pits at that particular time. But just to conclude on this particular point, it is a danger. It doesn't look it, but you, as Toto Wolff alluded to in his post-qualifying press conference, you only have to go back to the 2009 Hungarian Grand Prix and the spring that flew into Felipe Massa's helmet and caused his crash and nearly ended his career to recognise that a canister of that going into a driver these days, yes, we have the halo, but who knows what could happen.
It's a very serious incident, and considering what we've seen as well we see not just the Dutch fans, because I don't want to say it's purely the Dutch. They have been brought incredible atmospheres with the flares and pyrotechnics to some of the events that we've seen on TV and we get to go to. But Formula One is starting to see that there are flares at these events. Now they pose a risk. We've got Monza just coming up as well, where the Tifosi love to bring a great atmosphere and similar sorts of pyrotechnics. Do we see the FIA and Formula One immediately clamping down? Do you think, I haven't been into the circuit yet today, do you think we see stricter searches already? Do we see that taking place at Monza? And do we look at things like extra protective fencing around tracks or anything like that going into the future?
Let's hope not with regard to the latter that you've just mentioned, because that would be a real shame if it went that far. I mean, just to confirm, bags are checked as you go through the gates at every single gate. How thorough are those bags checked? Not very. I mean, just to give you my experience, when I go through the gates here, I'm simply asked to unzip my computer bag and they just take a quick peek inside. Now, they just see what's sitting on top. They're not actually looking at what might be underneath. And any fan could have something sitting underneath, a sandwich or a water bottle or anything like that, what they might be carrying in, wrapped in a towel. They can't search everything, because if they did that, the queues would be absolutely enormous and the majority of fans wouldn't get into the track because they'd be stuck in the security queues. So that's the last thing that promoters want to do, is to hold up the fans from getting in. How do we go about this? It's a really tricky one for F1 and all the race promoters to try and solve. But as I say, at the moment, it is a real minority. So let's again put it into context and perspective.
Let's hope that it is just going to be a small handful of idiots that don't ruin it for the rest of the F1 going public. Somebody who's probably quite pleased about all of that commotion with off-track incidents is Otmar Safnauer, because we were talking while the press conferences were taking place with the team principals, and a lot came out from Otmar Safnauer yesterday, and that's kind of been overshadowed by what happened on track and, of course, Max Verstappen's success in qualifying.
It was a very intriguing press conference from Otmar, but as you would expect, he defended himself, he defended the team, and the more intriguing comments actually came out while that press conference was just about to start, from Oscar Piastri himself, pretty much pointing very accusing fingers at the way Alpine, and in particular Otmar, had behaved with regard to the way things were announced about him staying at Alpine, which, as we now know, was never the case with regard to that heads of agreement contract he'd signed rather than an actual contract. But it's now become a case of he said, she said. It's done and dusted now. Let's move on. Oscar Piastri is a McLaren driver. What's going to happen from Otmar out of this, though? I think, and Laurent Rossi, the CEO of Alpine, that might be the bigger question. As we mentioned in Parcs Fermé on Saturday, they've not come out of this smelling of roses.
Yeah, it might be a difficult position for Otmar Safnauer, and he'll be hoping that perhaps Fernando Alonso can do him some favours and get that speed that he missed out on in Q2 with the incident with Sergio Perez, and get Alpine perhaps into the points today, just to, again, put a nice shining rainbow on what's been a bit of a dark cloud of a couple of days for Alpine. Quickly on the race as well, we should talk about on-track action going into today. Is it Max's to win, or is it Mercedes or Ferrari that can perhaps make a real impression on Red Bull? Because it's not been that perfect weekend, but he got it right when it mattered most for Verstappen.
They made the changes overnight on Friday to that car, because as we saw after FP1 when he had the gearbox issue, come FP2, and we, as I say, we fully expected Max to be back up there on top of the timesheet, and the car was really struggling. They'd not got the bodywork quite right. They did make the changes that were necessary. In particular, they made the tweaks to the rear wing levels. That proved the difference. And can we really see anybody beating Max today? I think the only thing that can beat Max is on reliability. We saw it happen on Friday. It's not beyond the realms of possibility, but actually on track, if everything's reliable with that car, you just can't see anybody beating him today. It's got to be Max all the way for that win.
There's going to be a few 100,000 fans in orange today that will be hoping that that is the case. And I tell you what, our little beachside residence here where we've been filming this weekend is going to be very busy if that comes to fruition. Ian, thanks so much as always. GPFans.com, where you can find all of Ian's musings throughout the weekend and every Grand Prix weekend when it comes to the world of Formula One. And of course, GP Fans Global on Twitter, Instagram and TikTok as well, to give us a follow on social media.